The Department of Peace Operations, DPO, French, Département d'Opérations de Maintien de la Paix, is a department of the United Nations charged with the planning, preparation, management, and direction of UN peacekeeping operations. Previously known as the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, DPKO, it was created in March 1992, as part of a restructuring of the UN's peace and security apparatus. The DPO retains the core functions and responsibilities of its predecessor, with a greater emphasis on cohesion, integrating different resources and knowledge, and promoting human rights. With an annual budget of roughly $6.5 billion, the DPO is the largest UN agency by expenditure, exceeding the UN's own regular budget. As of March 2020, it oversees 81,370 personnel serving in 13 peacekeeping missions. The DPO traces its roots to 1948 with the creation of the United Nations Military Observer Group for India and Pakistan, UNMOGIP, and the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization, UNTSO. Up to the late 1980s, peacekeeping missions were operated by 6 officials in the United Nations Office of Special Political Affairs, which was headed first by Under-Secretary General Ralph Bunche, and subsequently Brian Urquhart and Merak Golding. From the beginning, peacekeeping operations operated with a clear doctrine that applied to its traditional or classical peacekeeping operations for interstate ceasefires. Peacekeepers did not take sides or discharge firearms, save in self-defense, or meddle in politics. The Department of Peacekeeping Operations was created in March 1992 when Boutros Boutros-Ghali took office as Secretary General of the United Nations. Its creation was one of his first decisions. In organizational terms, it upgraded and expanded upon the work of the previous Field Administration and Logistics Division, FALD, which remained active as a subordinate department. Golding became Under-Secretary General, or USG, for peacekeeping with Kofi Annan appointed as his deputy. The role of the DPKO, however, wasn't clarified until June 1992, when Boutros-Ghali issued an agenda for peace, a plan to strengthen the UN's capacity for preventive diplomacy and peacekeeping. French nationals have served as Under-Secretaries General for peacekeeping operations since 1997. 10. Organizational structure edit. Indian peacekeeper with a child in Congo, for MONUSCO mission, 2000. DPO is split into 2 main offices, the Office of Operations and the Office of Mission Support, OMS. Included within the Office of Mission Support are the Logistics and Administrative Divisions, which provide logistics, personnel, and financial support services to DPO missions. OMS is responsible for determining financial reimbursement to UN member states for their contribution of contingent-owned equipment, troops, and services to peacekeeping missions. Letters of assist are an important part of this. Also part of DPO are mine action, training, best practices, and military and police divisions. A March 2007 United Nations General Assembly resolution titled Strengthening the Capacity of the Organization in Peacekeeping Operations has called for the restructuring of the department and the establishment of a separate Department of Field Support. Whereas the new entity serves as a key enabler by coordinating the administration and logistics in UN peacekeeping operations, DPO concentrates on policy planning and providing strategic directions. This reorganization was paralleled by a DPO reform effort launched in 2005 entitled Peace Operations 2010, which further pursues reforms initiated by the Brahimi report of the Panel on United Nations Peacekeeping Operations. This included an increase in personnel, the harmonization of the conditions of service of field and headquarters staff, the development of guidelines and standard operating procedures, and improving the partnership arrangement between the Department of Peace Operations, DPO, and the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, African Union, and European Union. One area of this reform effort has been the development of clearer internal doctrine or guidance for UN peacekeeping. The highest-level DPO doctrine document was issued in 2008, known as the Capstone Doctrine. Very recently, with the newest reform efforts, Secretary-General Guterres has made efforts to streamline peacekeeping efforts to conserve finances, and eliminate excess and unnecessary roles. Shared regional divisions of the DPA and DPO will restructure and remove duplication of tasks, allowing for more manpower to be available for new initiates and existing operations. This gives the department more resources and responsibilities for broader peace-building efforts, which are of course by their nature linked to political analysis and strategy. Clip, 2018. While peacekeeping operations are at an all-time high, and funding continues to receive budget cuts, efficiency measures will allow peacekeeping operations to remain intact. Removing duplications will allow for a wider spectrum of support to be available for troops on the ground. The bulk of peacekeeping operations funding is appropriated much like the general budget, but permanent members of the Security Council are required to pay a larger share, and all states are free to contribute additional funding, equipment, or other services to missions of their respective choices. Current UN peacekeeping operations budget for the fiscal year July 1, 2021 to June 30, 2022 amounts for $6.38 billion. This amount finances 10 of the 12 ongoing UN peacekeeping missions, along the liquidation of the UN African Union hybrid operation in Darfur, UNAMID, and logistics support for the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, providing the technology, logistics, and general support to all peace operations through global service centers in Brindisi, Italy, and a regional service center in Entebbe, Uganda. The UN Truce Supervision Organization, UNSO, and the UN Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan, UNMOJOP, are excluded from the peacekeeping operations budget and are financed through the regular UN budget. The top 5 providers of assessed contributions to the UN peacekeeping operations budget for 2020 to 2021 are: United States, 27.89%, China, 15.21%, Japan, 8.56%, Germany, 6.09%, and United Kingdom, 5.79%. As of 2010, DPO leads 16 different missions in Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, Americas, Europe, and Asia. Serving in these missions are over 100,000 uniformed and civilian personnel. Total approved annual expenses are over $5 billion for the period July 2006 to June 2007. At an October 2006 press conference, then USG Jean-Marie Guiheno announced that peacekeeping operations had reached an all-time high, and will continue to expand as UNIFIL and UNMIT reach full strength, and if a UN mission enters Darfur. Peacekeeping by the United Nations is a role of the UN's Department of Peace Operations as an instrument developed by the organization as a way to help countries torn by conflict to create the conditions for lasting peace. It is distinguished from peacebuilding, peacemaking, and peace enforcement, although the United Nations does acknowledge that all activities are mutually reinforcing and that overlap between them is frequent in practice. Peacekeepers monitor and observe peace processes in post-conflict areas and assist ex-combatants in implementing the peace agreements they may have signed. Such assistance comes in many forms, including separating former combatants, confidence-building measures, power-sharing arrangements, electoral assistance, strengthening the rule of law, and economic and social development. Accordingly, UN peacekeepers, often referred to as blue berets or blue helmets because of their light blue berets or helmets, can include soldiers, police officers, and civilian personnel. Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter gives the United Nations Security Council the power and responsibility to take collective action to maintain international peace and security. Most of these operations are established and implemented by the United Nations itself, with troops obeying UN operational control. In these cases, peacekeepers remain members of their respective armed forces, and do not constitute an independent UN army, as the UN does not have such a force. In cases where direct UN involvement is not considered appropriate or feasible, the Council authorizes regional organizations such as NATO, the Economic Community of West African States, or coalitions of willing countries to perform peacekeeping or peace enforcement tasks. Jean-Pierre Lacroix is the head of the Department of Peace Operations. He took over from the former Undersecretary General Hervé Ladsis on April 1, 2017. Since 1997, all directors have been French. DPKO's highest-level doctrine document, entitled United Nations Peacekeeping Operations, Principles and Guidelines, was issued in 2008. Once a peace treaty has been negotiated, the parties involved might ask the United Nations for a peacekeeping force to supervise various elements of the agreed-upon plan. This is often done because a group controlled by the United Nations is less likely to favor the interests of any one party, since it itself is controlled by many groups, namely the 15-member Security Council and the intentionally diverse United Nations Secretariat. If the Security Council approves the creation of a mission, then the Department of Peacekeeping Operations begins planning for the necessary elements. At this time, the senior command team is selected. The department will then seek contributions from member nations. Since the UN has no standing force or supplies, it must form ad hoc coalitions for every task undertaken. Doing so results in both the possibility of failure to form a suitable force, and a general slowdown in procurement once the operation is in the field. Romeo Dallaire, force commander in Rwanda during the Rwandan genocide there, described the problems this poses by comparison to more traditional military deployments. He told me the UN was a pull system, not a push system like I had been used to with NATO, because the UN had absolutely no pool of resources to draw on. You had to make a request for everything you needed, and then you had to wait while that request was analyzed. For instance, soldiers everywhere have to eat and drink. In a push system, food and water for the number of soldiers deployed is automatically supplied. In a pull system, you have to ask for those rations, and no common sense seems to ever apply. Shake hands with the devil, Dallaire, pages 99 to 100. It has been shown that contributors deploy their troops with varying speed. While the peacekeeping force is being assembled, a variety of diplomatic activities are being undertaken by UN staff. The exact size and strength of the force must be agreed to by the government of the nation whose territory the conflict is on. The rules of engagement must be developed and approved by both the parties involved and the Security Council. These give the specific mandate and scope of the mission, e.g. when may the peacekeepers, if armed, use force, and where may they go within the host nation. Often, it will be mandated that peacekeepers have host government minders with them whenever they leave their base. This complexity has caused problems in the field. When all agreements have been completed, the required personnel are assembled, and final approval has been given by the Security Council, the peacekeepers are deployed to the region in question. The financial resources of UN peacekeeping operations are the collective responsibility of UN member states. Decisions about the establishment, maintenance, or expansion of peacekeeping operations are taken by the Security Council. According to UN Charter, every member state is obligated legally to pay their respective share for peacekeeping. Peacekeeping expenses are divided by the General Assembly based upon a formula established by member states which takes into account the relative economic wealth of member states among other factors. In 2017, the UN agreed to reduce the peacekeeping budget by $600 million after the US initially proposed a larger decrease of approximately $900 million. A United Nations military observer, UNMO, is a military official deployed by the United Nations to provide support to a UN mission or peace operation. Described as the eyes and ears of the UN Security Council, observers fulfill a variety of roles depending on scope, purpose, and status of the UN mission to which they are attached. A UNMO is generally tasked with monitoring and assessing post-conflict agreements, such as a ceasefire or armistice, the withdrawal of military forces, or the maintenance of a neutral buffer zone. Observers usually undergo special training to ensure neutrality, diplomacy, and de-escalation techniques. The first group of United Nations military observers arrived in the mission area on January 24, 1949 to supervise the ceasefire between India and Pakistan in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. These observers, under the command of the military advisor appointed by the UN Secretary-General, formed the nucleus of the United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan, UNPOL. Following renewed hostilities of 1971, UNPOL has remained in the area to observe developments pertaining to the strict observance of the ceasefire of December 17, 1971 and report thereon to the Secretary-General. Duties and responsibilities. Monitor the various agreements on ceasefires, withdrawals, and demilitarization. Ground, sea, and aerial patrolling of both sides of the conflict, including the areas along the confrontation lines. Patrol demilitarized zone. Help resolve local difficulties, social, economic, etc., by liaison with all sides of the conflict. Investigate allegations of aggression or ceasefire violations. An early and still operating observer mission is the United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan, UNPOL, established on the India-Pakistan border in 1949 to monitor the ceasefire called for by the United Nations Security Council. Location and headquarters: ceasefire line in Jammu and Kashmir states with major posts in Rawalpindi, Pakistan/Srinagar, India. Primary observing officer: Croatian Major General Dragutin Repin appointed by Kofi Annan. Participating observers: 113 military and civilian personnel, from 8 countries. Casualties: 11. Time frame: 1949, present. Location and headquarters: Republika Demokratika Timor-Leste with major post in Dili, formerly East Timor. Primary observing officer: Atul Khara appointed by Kofi Annan. Participating observers: 34 with 1,600 supporting UN police. Casualties. Time frame: 2006, present. Previous missions: UNAMET 1999, UNTEAT 1999 to 2002, UNMIZET 2002 to 2005, and UNATIL 2005 to 2006. The United Nations Police, UNPOL, is an integral part of the United Nations peace operations. Currently, about 11,530 UN police officers from over 90 countries are deployed in 11 UN peacekeeping operations and 6 special political missions. The mission of the UN police is to enhance international peace and security by supporting member states in conflict, post-conflict and other crisis situations to realize effective, efficient, representative, responsive, and accountable police services that serve and protect the population. Since the 1960s, the United Nations member states have contributed police officers to United Nations peacekeeping operations. The policing tasks of these operations were originally limited to monitoring, observing, and reporting, but by the early 1990s, advising, mentoring and training of these personnel were adopted into the activities of the peace operations. The UN Police, authorized by the United Nations Security Council according to the rule of law and international human rights, are to maintain public order, protect life and property as a full or partial substitute for the host nation's police force as observers only. Indian policemen of the MONUSCO-formed police unit and the Congolese National Police patrol the streets of Goma, Nord Kivu Province, Democratic Republic of Congo, December 7, 2011. The UN police consist of formed police units, FPU, individual police officers, IPO, specialized teams, and civilian experts, pursue community-oriented and intelligence-led policing approaches to contribute to the protection of civilians and human rights, address, among others, sexual and gender-based violence, conflict-related sexual violence and serious and organized crime, and conduct investigations, special operations, and electoral security, S/2016/952. United Nations Police provide comprehensive and cohesive protective and mentoring services in 18 peacekeeping missions globally from Haiti in Central America, MINUSTA, to African nations of Western Sahara, MINURSO, Mali, MINUSMA, Darfur, UNAMID, Liberia, UNMIL, Côte d'Ivoire, UNOSI, Central African Republic, MINUSCA, Democratic Republic of Congo, MONUSCO, ABI, UNISFA, South Sudan, UNMISS, Libya, UNSMIL, Guinea-Bissau, UNIOGBIS, in Asia Afghanistan, UNAMA, Iraq, UNAMI, Lebanon, UNIFIL, and in Europe Kosovo, UNMIK, and Cyprus, UNFICIP. In Kosovo and East Timor, UN police were given an executive mandate to safeguard law and order while facilitating the launch of a new domestic police service. The UN police mission in Kosovo helped to establish the Kosovo Police Service successfully. In Timor-Leste, the UN police returned to their more traditional role of advising and supervising operations, leaving districts of the country to the authority of the national police. Since the 1990s, the number of United Nations police officers in action has significantly increased from 5,233 in March 1993 to 14,703 deployed in March 2011. It has reduced in 2017 to 11,963, March 2017. The UN police can be deployed alongside military personnel or independently. Through the Global Focal Point for Police, Justice, and Corrections, United Nations police officers from the United Nations Police Division Standing Police Capacity also assist UN country teams, guided by the UN Resident Coordinator. The duties and roles of the UN Police, UNPOL, component in a peacekeeping operation or in a special political mission may vary, depending on each mission's reality. The host state policing institutions are, often, primarily responsible for the link between the government and security issues. Therefore, UNPOL play an important role in building the capacity of the host government policing institutions and other law enforcement agencies, especially in conflict and post-conflict situations, including technical assistance, co-location, training and mentoring programs, where mandated. Essentially, there are three different categories to work in United Nations police component. 1. As an individual police officer, IPO. An IPO is temporary seconded, individually, to work within United Nations and share his/her knowledge with the host state policing institutions. United Nations efforts are to bring high specialized officers to mission areas. Some of the requirements to work as an individual police officer, for instance, are to be at least 25 years old, maximum 62, with a minimum police-related working experience of 5 years. 2. As part of a formed police unit, FPU, component, FPU roles includes crowd control and protection of UN assets. The whole component is assessed as a unit before being deployed to a peacekeeping operation. 3. As a professional and higher categories staff, this kind of appointment may allow you to initiate a career in United Nations, and often a master's degree or higher education is required. The salaries are higher, and this includes special functions in a mission like chiefs and senior police advisors. Also, UNPOL may be responsible for policy and guidance development, creating policy and guidance and defining the parameters of international police peacekeeping. Strategic planning, strengthening the police division's resources and ability to conduct strategic planning. Selection and recruitment processes, improving efforts to recruit, select, deploy, and rotate highly qualified staff in missions. Increasing the number of female officers in the UN Police Service. Operational support to missions through the standing police capacity, increasing the effectiveness of the operational support provided by the standing police capacity. Response to sexual and gender-based violence, SGBV, strengthening its response to sexual and gender-based violence and creating guidance to assist its police officers. Global lead, partnerships, and regional cooperation, leading the area of international policing and developing partnerships for more effective delivery of its mandates. The United Nations Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OCHR, expressed its deep concern over excessive use of force by Guinea's security forces against demonstrators ahead of long-delayed presidential runoff polls. 1 man was killed and more than 60 others injured when government forces used live fire in their effort to quell demonstrations in the capital, Conakry. The office said that while it appreciated that authorities had a difficult task in dealing with the demonstrations, which in some cases degenerated into violence, including stone throwing. But it said that it believes government forces committed serious rights violations by indiscriminately shooting at unarmed civilians, sometimes at point-blank range, breaking into and ransacking private homes, and severely beating young men who put up no resistance. Some of the security forces' operations appeared to target entire areas indiscriminately, and little effort was made to distinguish between violent protesters and those who had taken no part in the demonstrations, Oker said. It has also been confirmed that an unknown number of people were arbitrarily denied lawyers, also breaking the law. Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon and the Security Council have begun strongly condemning the suicide attack on the United Nations compound in Afghanistan's western city of Herat, where members of staff of the UN mission in the country and other agencies are based. There were no casualties among the UN staff, but some security guards were wounded, the spokesperson of the Secretary-General said in a statement. A number of assailants were killed in the attack, and the UN is conducting a full investigation. In addition, the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, also condemned the attack and stressed that the organization was in the country to support efforts to restore peace and provide humanitarian and development assistance to the people. The attack did not disrupt UN activities in Herat, however. The United Nations stands ready to assist the upcoming referendum that will decide whether Southern Sudan declares independence from Africa's largest country, an official with the world body said today, with voter registration set to kick off in 2 weeks. During voting day, more than 3,000 registration kits for distribution in Southern Sudan and 840 kits for the north, along with registration books and cards, were handed over to the SSRC and its bureau in Juba, the southern capital. 1960, the second police officers are used in the UN operation in Congo, ONUC. 1964, marks the first time the formal police component is used in the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus. 1989, saw the increased use of the UN police because of the end of the Cold War. Police are used in peacekeeping operations in Namibia, El Salvador, and Mozambique. 1995, the UN police is instrumental in the UN mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Recognized as a central tool for helping countries recover from conflict. 1999, UN police are deployed to Kosovo. 2000, 5,840 UN police are on peacekeeping missions. 2006, the standing capacity is established. 2007, a half-women FPU is sent from India to Liberia. Officers are also sent to Darfur. Some of the functions of the UN police include: interim law enforcement, responsible for policing and all law enforcement. Some examples are the operations in Kosovo and Timor-Leste. Formed police units. These are used for crowd control and quelling riots. Protecting UN personnel. They also work in tandem with local law enforcement. Thank you for watching this video.